Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Deborah Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Joel Haber, a host of the 18 Jewish Foods podcast and author of Chulent and Hamin. And his website is tasteofjew.com. So welcome, Joel. Great to
Thanks
talk
so much,
food with
Deb.
you today. Great to talk food with you today.
Yeah, looking forward.
Now, little known fact, Joel and I have known each other for about 20 plus years from way back when you lived
Yeah, I
in
mean,
LA.
I moved to Israel in I'm sorry, I moved to LA in '03, so it was around then or shortly after that we met. Yeah, sure.
And we met through the screenwriting world, and now or the screenwriting reporting world, and now we are chatting about the food world. So isn't life funny?
Yes, and filling.
Indeed. And so where did the love of food come from? I mean, because especially since you moved, like I said, I knew you as Fun Joel, screenwriting world. Now you are Food Joel. So what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved food. I just wasn't doing food like professionally. I was just something that I loved, and I was always passionate. And I wrote a couple articles back in the day, even like when I still lived in LA. I wrote a couple of articles. But when I moved to Israel, I became a tour guide. And one of my main, most popular tours is a culinary tasting tour in the famous outdoor market of Jerusalem, Shuk Machane Yehuda. And as I dug down into the food, it kind of opened up this whole world of food history for me that I didn't really know much about before. Plus, I also had the honor of knowing Gil Marks of blessed memory, who was a great Jewish food historian. And those two things sort of like inspired me, and I started to do more of that. And eventually it developed. And then when COVID hit and I had no tourism, I was able to really ramp it up even more.
I like, well, I am, optimist extraordinaire. So I love all the blessings that came out of COVID. And for you, it was this.
Yeah. I
And
mean, like I said, I was doing it already, but it just offered me the opportunity to take it up a whole like 5 notches.
excellent. So what are the different things that you do in sharing the love of food?
So the food tours do continue, but in addition to that, I write. So I've been writing on my website. I also write articles, largely for the Nasher and other places as well. I am working on a book that I'm nearing completion of the first draft, and then lots of revisions to come, but that'll be a big step. And I also lecture. So I've been on about 4 now lecture tours throughout the United States. I've also gotten to other places, speaking on all different topics about Jewish food history. And now I've launched my new podcast as well.
We'll get more into the podcast in a second, but I what is this fascination everybody has with Jewish food?
I mean, I think that there's been a massive increase in just a love and a passion for food in general. I mean, that's been developing for a long time, but people have become really passionate about food. And not to say that we are certainly not the only culture like this, but food is, I think, particularly important in Jewish culture. Not necessarily, I'm saying it's the most important of anybody of any culture, but it is a massive part of our culture. And so, one could say it could go in either direction. If you want to dig into food and you're Jewish, then you'll discover the Jewish food. Or if you're really into food and you start looking at the Jewish food, then it offers you a window onto the Jewish culture, which is kind of my take, my angle when I write and lecture is not just looking at food by itself, but using it as a window onto a discussion of culture and history and things like that.
And so your podcast is called 18 Jewish Foods. Well, 18, obviously 18 is very significant in Jewish culture. But what is your vision? Tell me about the show.
Sure. So, since this is going to be my first podcast, I decided that kind of the smart thing would be to start small and see how it goes, see if I like it, see if how it's received by other people. And so I decided to do a closed-ended series, not something ongoing like what you have or like what most podcasts are. And then if it's good, I'll do another one that's open-ended. So it's based on a lecture that I gave a number of times in the past called 18 Jewish Foods. And This is 20 episode series. I have an intro episode, 18 different episodes for each of the foods, and then a wrap up episode. Within each episode, I look at one or sometimes a category, so it will be one plus different foods that I feel meet three strict criteria for being classified as a Jewish food. In general, I'm very broad about it. For this series, I'm very narrow about it. And in each episode, that food highlights something different about Jewish culture. So each episode will not only be talking about a food, it'll also talk about something to learn about the Jewish people. And finally, within each episode, and these are short episodes, 15, 20 minutes each, within each episode, there's a short interview as well of somebody contemporary who's connected with that food to show that, these foods are still alive now and are taking on new faces all the time. So that's the idea of the podcast.
Well, and I know you're going to share recipes, so can we use that as the example of how it
Sure. I
fits
mean,
into
it
those 3
won't, it,
categories?
pardon?
Of how it fits into the 3 criteria.
Sure. So basically, I shouldn't say they have to meet three criteria. They have to meet one of the three. Basically, I say like the strictest definition for me of what makes a Jewish food. So either it's something that is unique to the Jews and or originally Jewish. That's the strictest criteria, is if it's like totally a Jewish food, and there are examples of that. The second category would be something that is eaten by Jews and non-Jews, but that the Jewish version is different in some way, often due to the laws of kosher, often just due to the tastes that Jews have. And the third, and it's admittedly the loosest category, but I use it the least, is a food that is very strongly associated by non-Jews with the Jewish people. So the recipe that I'll be sharing is for a type of Shabbat stew. This is also the subject of the book that I'm writing. What I mean by that is that almost every Jewish community around the world has some type of slow cooked dish that begins being prepared on Friday and then is left to cook through the entire night on a low heat Friday night to be eaten hot for lunch on Shabbat on Sabbath. And many communities around the world Jewish communities around the world have a different version of this. So I'm writing a book that's using these different dishes as a way of following Jewish migrations throughout the diaspora. How do we get from place to place? What was the situation in each place, etc. In conjunction with that, I recently, I guess about a year and a half ago now, put out a free e-cookbook that is available via my website. And one of the 12 recipes that I included in there is one that I invented. So, as you know, and as those who don't know me can hear from my voice and maybe look at my shirt if you're watching it, I'm an American originally, but I moved to Israel about 15 years ago. And I think that I sort of try to bridge those two cultures together. So the recipe is called Hamin Kharshuf. Hamin is the more popular Hebrew name for what commonly in English or in America is called Chulent. So I use the Israeli vernacular name Hamin, and Kharshuf is the Hebrew and Arabic word for a type of a vegetable that does exist in the States, but it's not particularly popular there, called cardoon. It's a type of a thistle. It's a relative of the artichoke, and it kind of looks like a prehistoric celery. But it's delicious. It's a lot of work, but it's delicious. And to me, it's the taste of winter in Israel. So I created a specific type of chamin that includes this ingredient. Also, because I know that it's not the most readily available, its taste is similar to artichoke. So I do offer the option of swapping that out and using like artichoke bottoms in the chamin instead. So that's kind of what I did. And I put in all sorts of other flavors that are, to me, real Israeli flavors.
So you really kind of have the best of both worlds, being an American in Israel, because you've got access to like flavors from everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing here is our produce. Anybody who's been to Israel knows that our produce is amazing. My favorite comment that I ever received from a tourist, we were eating somewhere, And she says, "Wow, these tomatoes taste like tomatoes." Because we grow most of our produce. Almost 90% of the produce that we consume is grown locally. Farm to table before that was a thing. And therefore, we don't need to pick things before they're ripe so that they can stay on the shelf for longer. We can breed them for flavor instead of for, durability. And so our produce is really good. And we have quite a wide array of things. But it also means that we eat seasonally. When they're not in season, you cannot get them. And then when they come back into season, you get excited about it. So to me, that's one of the greatest things food wise in Israel is our produce is outstanding.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody that excited about vegetables, and I talk to a lot of people about food, so
Yeah.
amazing.
It's
It
but it's really a revelation to Americans. I mean, at the beginning, for some people, it could be frustrating, like, "Oh, but I always put these 2 things in a salad together." And we're like, "Well, tough. That's in season in March, and that's in season in August. So, change your recipe." But really, it is an amazing thing, yeah.
it's a what other tips do you have for cooking with vegetables or really and yeah, well, let's stick with the vegetables, to really bring out their flavor.
I don't know about tips in terms of that because you don't need to bring out the flavor when they're already there. But I guess one of the things I would say is like maybe shop as much as you can at farmers markets where you know that the produce is fresh and local and hasn't been in a warehouse or a refrigerator for the last 6 months or something like that. Even in an area that doesn't exclusively eat seasonally, you can still familiarize yourself with the seasons and try to look for the things that are in season then. I think that it's not about how to maximize the flavor, it's about how to start with something that already tastes good.
That's true, because then it's good products, whether it's produce or anything else you're eating, it's going to make a difference anyway. And that is a common theme that I hear in these
For sure, for sure.
conversations.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I'm not like an expert on vegetable cooking, so I don't have any great cooking tips. I'm not a chef. I cook. I'm not a chef. But yeah, to me, like obviously the ingredients is where it all starts from.
and so, what is your earliest food memory or cooking memory?
Um, I would say my earliest cooking memory, which I guess wasn't really cooking, was more assembling, but I'm not a big fan of turkey. And I would get fed up eventually on Thanksgiving with all the turkey, and I don't like it, and I find it's dry. And my mom's a great cook, and I'm not saying she doesn't know how to make turkey. I just don't like turkey. And so one time it was a Thanksgiving in my house, and I just got fed up, and I'm like, I'm making a sauce. And I went into the kitchen and I just grabbed a bunch of stuff that would go well together, and I mixed something up and I, drizzled it on top of my turkey. And I have no recollection of what was in it. It was something fruity, probably some kind of jam in there or something, among other things. But to me, it made the turkey taste better. So that's the first time I remember actively, engaging in creation in the kitchen.
And can you give me like a decade or about how old you were?
I guess I was a teenager. I don't remember exactly, but I guess maybe an early teenager. I don't really remember what year it was, but actually, I could say it had to be teen years because the house that I was in, we were already living there since I was like 12 and a half. So it would have to be after that.
Well, it sounded very teenagery.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't in my 20s. So it's somewhere in my teenage years. Yeah.
So what is it? And what the other category that you mentioned that I'm a little stuck on is foods that people think are Jewish. What are some examples of those?
Right. I'm not even saying that they think it and they're wrong. I'm just saying the things that people associate with Jews. So, for example, like bagels is something that's very strongly associated with it. It happens to be actually, if one does the research, a genuinely Jewish food. But regardless, it is definitely something that people associate. Here's a good example of two foods that are associated with Jews that are not specifically Jewish. So there are many foods from around the world that in the local dialect are called Jewish whatever. Okay. Some of you may know there's this Italian fried artichoke known as carciofi alla Giudia. That means Jewish artichokes. Okay. In America, there are two foods that you're probably familiar with that you don't even think about are called Jewish in their names in English. One of them is kosher dills, dill pickles. When they say kosher, they don't mean it's fit to be eaten. They're no more kosher than any other pickles. That's another way of saying Jewish pickles. And the other, you can go into a supermarket and buy Jewish rye bread. Okay. What makes this rye bread or those pickles Jewish? The answer is nothing. But these were things that were eaten throughout Eastern Europe. When Jews moved to America, many people continued to eat the same things they were there, but it was via Jewish delicatessens that the rest of America kind of learned about those foods and therefore associated them with Jews specifically. They're not Jewish foods in particular. Many people throughout Eastern Europe and Russia would eat that kind of rye bread or those kinds of pickles. But in America, they became associated with Jews.
Really good example. And I earlier this year I interviewed Michael Weissman, whose book is The Rye Bread Marriage, and it's Latvian rye bread. So
Yeah.
I totally um I get the assumption, but I also know the history. So uh,
And I think to take the point one step further, it
mhm.
doesn't mean that it's not a Jewish food or that it's wrong to call it that, because everything is free flowing. And so, although it wasn't a particularly Jewish food there, it was an everybody food. In America, it was particularly Jewish. And so, to an American, maybe that is a Jewish food. Saying something is a Jewish food doesn't imply ownership to exclusion. Okay. Just because it's our food doesn't mean it's not somebody else's food also. If you own a Mercedes, that doesn't mean nobody else owns a Mercedes. Many people can own the same thing. And so calling something a Jewish food doesn't mean it's not a Latvian food or it's not a anything else food.
One one phrase I hear a lot is Jewish brisket versus brisket. I get it, but I only think of brisket as Jewish, and I know that's not necessarily accurate.
Right. I mean, I'm not an expert on the non-Jewish brisket because I only eat kosher, but I do know, for example, that Texas style barbecue uses brisket, and am certain that a Texas barbecued brisket doesn't taste anything like your Bubby's brisket. So obviously, there are many other styles of making something. I don't know if there's another way of making brisket that is, you know, non-Jewish or something like that, but certainly, you know, the same brisket is just an ingredient. It's a cut of meat. So you can make it in any, billions of ways.
Also, very, very true. I want to backtrack to bagels. What is your perfect bagel, topping wise? So, including type of and ingredients.
Yeah, I like a little bit of variety. I tend to often get something of a whole wheat style just for health reasons, but you can get whole wheat with all sorts of different toppings also. I don't typically go for a plain bagel or a plain whole wheat bagel. I usually like something on top. I don't like ones that are just salt because that's too salty for me. But poppy seeds, garlic, onion, sesame seeds, they're all good for me. And inside, cream cheese is always good. I'm not a lox guy personally. I'm not against it. It's just not to my taste. Um, but sometimes an omelet inside with maybe mushrooms and onions in there. That's always good, and some cheese. But yeah, I like to mix it up and do different things. In fact, I had a bagel today with like guacamole, avocado spread, and hard boiled egg and cheese and tomato. That's what I had this morning for breakfast.
Wow, and that to me sounds like we're talking about the different cultures. That is a fusion bagel, if
Yeah,
ever I
I
heard
guess
one.
so. I mean, it's not trying to be any culture, so.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Do you have any final food for thought to share?
Um, yeah, I mean, just to go back a moment to that, like, ownership idea, because I know that, you know, this has become like a sort of a political hot potato, and people are accusing people of appropriating food and all these things like that, and I just want to explain really briefly that the entire history of food is the history of people taking a food from one place, moving it somewhere else, and changing it in some way. There is no dish in the world, basically, that was created ex nihilo. Everything is based on something that came before it. So I can go to any culture, point to a food, and say, oh, yeah, well, you're making this, but those people made that, and this is just another version of that. So I think we need to get past these ideas because they're really irrelevant ideas. Either nobody is an appropriator of food or everybody is. And to me, that's an important point because I think that something that is a non-starter has been weaponized into a way of attacking another people. And it's not only against us, it happens all over the place. And I think it's overstated and wrong, in fact. So
Well, food is, to me, I'm guessing to you as well, food is love, right? So we should be celebrating other people's foods and incorporating them into our lives. That would
yeah.
be the kumbaya way of sharing, learning, exploring, and adopting and adapting, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Joel
My
Haber.
pleasure.
Where can people learn more about you?
So tasteofjew.com is my website. My podcast is 18 Jewish Foods, and it's available on all the major platforms. You can find it on any of them by searching. And if anybody wants to email me, they're welcome to be in touch at jewishfoodbook@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing your love of food, Jewish food, really all food, with me today. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube and or your favorite podcast platform. And if you go to jewishjournal.com/podcast, you can read the articles and get the recipes that go with each episode. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Enjoy, explore. That's what food is there for. Until next time, bon appetit.